All right, good afternoon, and thanks again for everybody who was able to join today. Today we have a talk from Michael Lambert at Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center, and he's going to be delving into two topics, the first being PeeringDB, and the other being related to some other routing policy items. And this was originally given at the 2019 Internet2 Global Summit, but I thought that since we're all sheltering in place and not able to really do a lot of tutorial and workshop content, this would be a good addition to sort of do over Zoom and record so that you can share it with people at your home institutions going forward in the future, since it's an important topic area and it relates to MANRS and things of that nature. We were hoping to have another talk on MANRS before this talk came about from Michael Sinatra, but he had a scheduling conflict. So there will be a talk about that subject a little bit later in the year, I think mid-September, which there'll be an announcement about. But hopefully that doesn't impact the ability of Michael to talk about this topic today. So Michael, I will toss it over to you to do the tutorial.
Okay, thanks, Jason, and good afternoon or good morning to everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Okay, as Jason said, this was originally presented as part of a routing security workshop that was held at the 2019 Internet2 Global Summit when the community was just getting started on MANRS compliance and things of that nature. As I recall, the speakers are myself, Grover Browning, Matt Zakauskas, and Larry Blunk. So the outline of the talk, the importance of publishing contact and routing information. These are components of MANRS, which, as Jason said, Michael Sinatra will be talking about in a few weeks. I'm going to do a brief overview of PeeringDB, which is a mechanism for publishing contact information, and doing a walkthrough of that, then talking about the Internet Routing Registry, a little bit of a background in RPSL, which is the database language the language that's used in the routing registry, using it, at least one registry, and a walkthrough of that. Okay, so why is that? Okay, so why is my screen not advancing now all of a sudden? Oop. Okay, the PeeringDB calls itself the Interconnection Database, and it's a freely available community-maintained database of networks, which are organizations and autonomous systems, exchanges, which are public peering points, and facilities, which include private peering points. You can see examples of these when I go through the walkthrough in a bit. It is sponsored by the industrial partners in the community. At the very top level, at $25,000 a year, they have Microsoft and Amazon, and they limit themselves to two of the top level sponsors a year, down to $2,500 per year level where there's no limit, and everything in between. The source code for PeeringDB is found on GitHub. I'm not sure why you'd want to implement it on your own, but you could do that. And one of the big significances of PeeringDB, in addition to having contact information, is that it can often be used as a source of truth for finding routing policies, that people will put the RPSL entries corresponding to the routing policies in PeeringDB for others to find for setting up peering. Okay, I pushed the button. Okay, why? Okay, using PeeringDB, it's simple. You create a user account, you associate that account with or create one or more networks, you add contacts and policies for your organization, and you can associate that with your account with or create facilities and exchanges. So as an example, I'm just going to walk through PeeringDB. Okay, why is that showing up in the middle of my screen all of a sudden? Okay, let's stop sharing that one. Okay, here's a what you get when you log into PeeringDB, you can see okay, where did annotate go? Oh, okay. I'm assuming you cannot see a mouse pointer or anything here. So there is a register link down here. So if you have not created an account, you can go there, and I can't do that since I already have an account with PeeringDB. So going back to the top, I can click on myself, and I can see that under existing affiliations, I have Three Rivers Optical Exchange, 3 Rocks as an organizational affiliate. You can select your language and two-factor authentication. It uses the Google Authenticator for two-factor authentication. You can affiliate with an organization if you haven't already done so, either the name of the organization or the ASN. And this will be done manually by the support staff at PeeringDB to associate you with that organization. And you can do things like change your email address or password. So if I click on Three Rivers Optical Exchange now, you can get just a brief overview of what our network looks like. We have none of our own facilities that are in here. And under networks, we have 3 Rocks as the network. So clicking there, you can see that we are in here at one public exchange point, which is PITIX, which is the Pittsburgh Internet Exchange, one of the smaller exchanges. Clicking there, you can see the various peers that are PITIX. For an exchange, you can see whether on the LAN, whether it does .1Q, what the MTU is, the prefixes that are done for the DMZ at the exchange, what local facilities are associated with PITIX, which are a couple of different colo points inside the closest thing Pittsburgh has to a carrier hotel. If I go back to our network, you can see that we have reference to a route set, an AS set or route set. That's RPSL speak I'll get to in a minute, but that's where we have our policy published. So anything belonging to AS5050 : ASL is something we would potentially want peers to use in generating filters. We have a looking glass. We're an educational research network. We have some small number of IPv4 and IPv6 prefixes. This is something that's optional, but it gives peers an indication of how many prefixes to expect from you when peering with you. And under protocol supported, we're willing to support IPv4 unicast, IPv6 unicast, multicast, and we do not select the never via route servers because the peering point at PITIX is route server based, so it's important that we do that. And we can scroll on down. There's a peering policy. This is a URL we haven't filled in. The general policy can be selective or open. Perhaps somewhat more restrictive than that even. Whether or not you have to peer at multiple locations, the ratio that's required, or if there's a contract required. Like most R&E things, we generally do not want to have contracts in place if we can avoid it. So we do not require contracts for peering. And then there is contact information. You can see that for policy, I'm the contact. Our general address is for the NOC. And this is one of those things that if you're not logged into PeeringDB, you will not necessarily see all the contact information. By default, it's mostly hidden to those who have actually signed up with PeeringDB. Now in the search bar, I'll do a search for 11164, which is Internet2 IPIX, or I2PX, which if you've been following things on the Internet2 peering and routing calls lately, you know that Jeff Bardig's in the process of bringing up an actual routing registry object to describe I2PX so that peers such as Hurricane Electric and Google will continue accepting those routes. And you can see that, okay, so I2PX is selected never via route servers. So I2PX wants to have direct peer-to-peer peering. with other sites and not rely on the route server BGP across an Exchange fabric. They clearly have a lot more sites than we do here, and sort of the expected contact information you would see for Internet2. And this is sort of what PeeringDB looks like. We can go to, just to see something large, Equinix Ashburn has a whole slew of peers at that location. If you are at Equinix Ashburn and we're looking for peers, PeeringDB would be a good place to go to try to find those to get started. Who you would reach out to. Also, if you have peering issues, it's often the point that the contacts listed for a site can help you track down peering problems. So let's go back now. Stop sharing that and go back to okay, I'm not seeing it. Okay, let me go back to presentation. Okay. Sorry for being cumbersome here. I've not done a talk on Zoom before. Now, having talked briefly about PeeringDB, which is a very useful resource for providing contact information and peering policies, I'll talk about the Internet Routing Registry. The Internet IRR is a distributed database of routing information, and it implements the Routing Policy Specification Language, RPSL, and it is used by many networks for generating router configurations. Quite often, this is used for peering filters. In principle, it can be used for much more than that. If you're a level 3 customer, or now CenturyLink, at least legacy level 3, used the IRR for your policy. So in what sense is it distributed? There are many RPSL-based databases worldwide. The regional internet registries all operate IRR components, ARIN, RIPE, APNIC, AFRINIC, LACNIC. Then there are some country-based registries also, like one run by Canary for the Canadian R&E community. There's a Japanese IRR and some others. There are a number of provider-based registries, as mentioned. Level 3 CenturyLink runs a registry, Rogers Cable in Canada, and some others. And there are also some general purpose registries which are not tied to particular geographies or to particular providers. These examples of these are the RADB or AltDB, and there may be some others out there too. Each registry mirrors 0 or more of the others. In general, the ones associated with the regional registries or the general purpose registries tend to mirror most of the other registries. And taken as a whole, these constitute the IRR. And there can be of danger, as with many things, of duplicate data from different registries. That's something that it's sort of up to the operator to make sure it doesn't happen to give bogus information from one database or another. And you can query these by whois, or there are also some specialized tools, which I'm not going to talk about in detail here, but I'll refer to more later for some references that can be used for querying the databases or for generating configurations from them. Okay. Okay, so as I said, the IRR is built on top of RPSL. RPSL is an object-oriented language for specifying routing policy. It had its beginnings with RIPE in Europe as RIPE 81 and later followed by RIPE 181, which were more ad hoc standards. Now RPSL is defined through several RFCs through the IETF. Sort of the most important ones are 2622, where the base of the language is defined. And to quote something on IRR.net, this document should only require a couple of read-throughs for the average user. This is long for quite a few RFCs, being 69 pages. So to get a thorough grounding of RPSL, yeah, you really need to work through this document. If you want to get going quick and dirty, as I'll point out later on, you don't really need to know all the nitty-gritty details. 2650, using RPSL in practice, has some examples. Some of these tend to be rather old examples, since I think we're probably pushing 20 years for RPSL definition in the RFCs. Then a little later than that, 4012, next generation of RPSL added support for IPv6 and multicast NLRIs for BGP, because that's sort of when things were starting to becoming something more than IPv4 unicast. Okay, types of RPSL. Okay, yes, types of RPSL object. There's a maintainer object, which everyone who has an entry in IRR needs to have. This is sort of the top level object for an entity, basically the owner of it. It's sort of every organization more or less has a maintainer object. And this is something which in general has to be manually created by the registry when you're setting up an account with them. And all other objects reference that. As I said, this is an object-oriented language, so it is at the root of the tree for any organization. Underneath the maintainer object, you have person types or role types. These are contacts with phone numbers, addresses, etc., a way to actually reach out and talk to people or to groups. A role account could be the NOC account. You could have individual accounts in there. There are, in general, technical contacts, administrative contacts for each maintainer object. Okay, bear with me. Let's see if that. A couple of other types of RPSL objects that are important are route or route 6. These are used to describe routes, either IPv4 or IPv6 routes. You would have one object for each route that you're going to announce, and associated with these is an origin AS, so that a route or route 6 object is keyed uniquely by the route and by the origin AS. So that if a route is going to be announced for multiple ASs, probably not best practice, but it is often done, then it would have need to have two entries in the IRR, one for the first AS, one for the second AS. The num object describes an autonomous system. And again, there would be one entry for each AS. Within, I don't go into details here. That's something that's left to dig into more when reading through the RFCs to really learn about RPSL. But these may contain routing policies for the autonomous system. You can describe what your import policy is, what your export policy is. In general, I think most people, when putting things into PeeringDB, will put things in with sort of the most general routing policy they can do, just for simplification there. And it's the simpler as it is, the easier it is to make sure it's correct. There are AS sets and route sets, which are collections of either autonomous systems or routes. And these get, so there are tools that will expand these, but one warning here is that not all tools will necessarily interpret the RFCs in the same way when expanding AS sets and route sets. I know that the level 3 generator doesn't work the same way as IRR tool set, which is one of the very early tools used for manipulating RPSL objects. And there are many more types than these, having to do with filter types or internet routers or many other things. The original goal was that you could use RPSL to completely configure your edge routers. and just do everything automatically through a centralized database. I think many of us have in the community have gone to this and by some other method and do a lot of more automated configuration than was done early on with RPSL when people were really just starting to think about automated configurations. Okay, so the component of IRR that I'm going to focus on the most is RADB. And that's not necessarily because it's better than the others, but it's the one I have the experience with. At PSC and 3 Rocks, we've been using it for the better part of 20 years. Personally, I would tend to steer away from the provider-based registries because quite often you can get entries stuck in there which are created by your provider if you do not have them already, and trying to get them updated can often be difficult, particularly if that provider has been sold a couple of times and the chain of contacts isn't necessarily what you'd like it to be. A lot of the other IRR implementations, Aaron, for example, they're perfectly usable. They're just something that we haven't used in the past. Aaron in particular is much more usable now than it used to be. Why would you not want to use RADB? Well, there is an annual fee for RADB. For a for-profit entity, it's $595 a year. For a nonprofit, it's $425. And there have been some concerns expressed recently on, perhaps on the wrong Aaron mailing list, that the code can be more secure with RADB than it is, that there's a newer version of the Internet Routing Registry daemon that has been released that not all registries are running yet. Okay, why? Okay, the Aaron Routing Registry, just a brief overview of it. Why would we use that? Well, it has strictly a web UI now, except for legacy users, and there are some people who like a web UI more than others do. An API is under development to enable more automated updates to their registry, and perhaps more important for many organizations, it's free for those who have Aaron RSAs. Why would you not want to use it? Well, one of the reasons is that it requires an Aaron RSA to be signed by the organization. And I know that there are many organizations, particularly in our community, who have had issues in signing the legacy RSA in particular with Aaron. And since these are sort of separate things for the newer resources obtained from Aaron and the legacy resources, the headache is too much for many university lawyers. However, if you're going to do RPKI, which I don't know that has been talked about on this series yet or will be, you're going to have an Aaron RSA to generate the ROAs for RPKI. You're going to have that agreement anyway if you want to do that level of routing security. Another argument against Aaron registry is it might not support full RPSL at this point. Again, one of those things that is under development, but many users really don't need the full power of RPSL if you're just going to do the basic announcing your general routing policy and letting people know what routes are that you originate. Okay, originally RADB was the Routing Arbiter database, and it was part of the NSF-funded Routing Arbiter project at Merit. Once funding for that went away, and this was sort of at the time of the commercialization of the internet, and that they needed to start charging because they needed to become sustainable. And at that point, they just rebranded the Routing Assets database, not tying it to that particular NSF project. So to use RADB, the first step is to create an account with them. I'll do a walkthrough of some of this stuff in just a moment. Create an account, you go to their website, you click on the register button, you go through some brief forms which have user information, information about your organization, information of your maintainer object, including contacts. And the last page is a confirmation. You click on the confirmation, then the next step is to stop and pay the bill that they will send you either by credit card at that point, or I think they can mail you one. There'll be a brief pause at that point while they create the maintainer object and send you your password. And at that point, then you can start adding other objects into RADB. Apologies again, this does not want to move forward the way it should. So for manipulating RADB data, there's a web interface, which is pretty much point and shoot. It relies on crypt-PW authentication, which is just hashed password-based authentication. And it's not clear that every record type is supported. I think it's pretty complete now, though, much more than it was, say, a year ago. And the other mechanism are, at the moment, are email templates, which can easily be scripted. You can use OpenPGP signing for authentication, and it has full support for all RPSL object types. There is an API under development too. I have not really looked at that. We tend not to do, at PSC tend not to do RESTful things like that. So more primitive forms of manipulating things are what we tend to do. My recommendation, and this is something that has worked for us over the years, your mileage may definitely vary on this one, is that given that, okay, an observation is that the hashed password formerly was visible in the whois for RADB. This seems to have been addressed recently, at least for RADB, perhaps not for some other registries. To use password authentication, then just to get set up with 2 or more OpenPGP keys. And yes, you need to have at least 2 of those because someone might leave at some point, and you, yes, you could go back in and get things reset through Merit and RADB folks, but it's easier to make sure that multiple people can access them. I'm not a big fan of shared OpenPGP keys. Others don't really mind them. But then again, if you're doing the OpenPGP keys and somebody leaves, make sure you delete that key when they leave. Then after you've set up the keys, delete the crypt-PW authentication and just use signed email for updates. Did I miss a slide back here? Yes, I did miss one slide on AltDB, which is another database. Sorry, going back like this. Why would you want to use it? It is completely free. There are no agreements needed. It was created as a no-cost alternative to RADB back, 20 years ago or so. Why would you not want to use it? It's an older version of IRRD and has limited and not very secure authentication types at this moment that may be being addressed at some point in the future based on something I read. And just what I'll make is a completely neutral comment. Using AltDB is like using ED as your editor on Unix. Yeah, you can get everything done that way if you want to. Not everyone wants to use ED as their editor. So this is what a sample email template looks like for mailing into RADB. We have an AS set, which are 3 Rox's commodity routes, a description which shows that it's okay, these are the commodity only ASNs that we announce. The ASs that are members of this AS set, a technical contact, which is referred to our role accountant, Aaron, our maintainer record, and this is the one that's created when you create your account with RADB, then a change log of when things have been updated lately, and you can You can keep a history there. It keeps multiple changed records in there if you want to sort of track when things were updated. It doesn't do full journaling or anything like that, so you don't necessarily know what was changed. That's something you'd have to do locally. And the bottom line there, the source shows that this is coming from RADB. If it's coming from Aaron, that would be Aaron, or level 3 or AltDB as other possibilities, because each registry can only modify records that come from that registry. So you might see you might have an entry in level 3 database. You cannot update that through RADB. You have to go to level 3 to update it. My typical workflow for putting things into RADB is that I create an update file, which would be something like this with a change in it. I use GPG to clear sign that and create a .asc file. That output file is then mailed to the autoresponder at RADB, which then processes it and sends a response back, which you need to look for to see whether things went well or there were errors in it. Usually any error messages are fairly descriptive as to what went wrong. Again, I do it this way because my MUA doesn't support inline signing. They have to be MIME signing of the objects doesn't work with the RADB implementation. And there can be multiple ways to email the .asc file, signed.asc file to the responder. You might be able to mail from just the mail command on the command line, cutting and pasting into your other MUA, things like that as the way to send it on to. Then this is a way which has worked very well for us for many years. So I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of what the interface looks like on RADB. Change my sharing now. Okay. Michael Sinatra said he will discuss RPKI during his MANRS talk. Fantastic. So on RADB, this is what
maybe make
like.
There we go. Yep, text a little bit bigger.
Yep. Again, perfect. As I mentioned to Jason earlier, he's looking at on a 13-inch laptop, and I have I'm iMac Retina, so things will look a little different. So when I log into my account here, I see on my account there. Okay, I can change my password or log out. This is the welcome page. Oh, thank you. This is the danger of doing live demos. As they say, never integrate in public. Okay. So this is where you got logged in. There's a getting started wizard where you can go through and fill in the initial details for your account. Things like your authorized contacts, billing records, who to email login instructions to, setting maintainer authentication. And you can get started with adding your autonomous system number objects or adding route objects. So if I go over to objects here in the pull down, our maintainer object. And the nice thing about this is, for the most part, there's no reason not to show these on a public talk like this, because you can find them anyway by querying who is it at RADB. So as I said, we have a couple of maintainers here, who gets the update mail, who gets changes in case of, or the maintainer object notifications, a list of PGP keys that are authorized to make changes, and a whole tracking history over time. As you can see, originally created this in 1998. So yes, we've been doing this for over 20 years. Then we, in Autumn objects, which are probably the next thing you'll create, we have a whole list of ASNs here that we probably need to prune this. Some of these we don't really do anything with at the moment, but sort of our base AS is AS 5050, and we have some policy in here which may or may not be completely up to date, because that is one of the drawbacks in using a database that you don't manipulate daily, is that it can be a good source for stale information. But from our I1 providers, we will import anything and not default, and pretty much the same thing for 11537, which is Internet2, and 16164, which is I2PX. And as you can see from our export statement for 11537, that we have been doing this clearly for a while, since we still refer to this as our Abilene object. So out of Autumn objects are created AS set objects, which are collections of autonomous systems. As you may recall, in PeeringDB, we had AS 5050 AS all as our object. And if we expand that out, we have just a way to get all the routes that we would possibly want to send to peers. This would be our customers, in some cases, some of our peers who want us to pass things along. So it's just members of these are, in general, either AS objects in this case, or other AS sets. Like AS 5050 AS commodity is the one I showed on a previous, which was referred to on a previous screen. So again, this just sort of demonstrates the object-oriented nature of RPSL. And you can probably intuit here, we have AS all has commodity, Abilene, peering only, and some others. And then we have an Abilene record, which has those who do commodity and Internet2 with us, or ones who just do Internet2 with us, or there are some we'll just have a peering relationship with for basically our member routes and local peering routes and Internet2. So this allows very fine granularity of how you describe your routing policy. An example of a role account which we've created is PSC networking, which is our NOC account, and it shows how to get in contact with us. The PSCnet admin number, it has a phone number, fax number for reaching out. Probably not as well, it's more duplicates information in PeeringDB, but it's been around a lot longer than PeeringDB. For example, routes. And this is slow in loading too, that's always helpful. You'll see here an example of this 192.112.192.0/24 is in twice, the two different origin ASs. One of them is using the 3 rocks ASN, the other is doing the ASN of the member. And if I click on this and expand it out, you can see this is under remarks. This route object has been registered by 3 rocks on behalf of one of its members. This is known as proxy registration, and there is a good deal of debate in the community as to whether or not this should be done. For smaller institutions, the curve for educating them for creating things in the registry and entering their objects, or even the cost with RADB, would outweigh the cost of doing proxy registrations. This way, by doing the proxy registration, you can be sure that all of your members are somehow in the database. Proxy registration, I don't think anybody thinks it's really a good idea, but it is, in many cases, probably the most practical way to do things. And again, there are similar things with the IPv6 route objects also, which look an awful lot like the route objects. And this is sort of the top level allocation for 3 rocks, our allocation from ARIN, with some underneath that being announced by separate ASNs. And again, a route set is a collection of route objects, and we try as much as possible to create one of these for each of our members in the hope that someday we're going to really get around to doing real router configuration, in particular filter configuration, using RPSL. There are some tools associated with RADB. There's an API. I'll just pull this up. And you can see you can generate, you can authorize get an authorization token for using this, something we haven't bothered doing yet. This allows you to use a RESTful interface for querying things or for doing updates on your objects. Again, something that's not the way I've done things. Other people are much more accustomed to doing RESTful interface type updates. Some of these others, you can do a bulk upload of RPSL into things. The routing asset health, I will just click on because I'm not, okay, I don't think I've configured anything there. This is something where you can configure RADB to send you notices if something has changed. There are other tools like this out there, like I think Artemis or BGP Alerter that you can run. I guess it's more one-stop shopping with RADB if you choose to go this route. So any questions up to this point? I don't see anything in the window, so I will move back to the...
Yep, none so far, but certainly if anybody does have questions, type them in the chat room and we'll make sure that they get answered at the end.
Okay, so sort of wrapping up here on IRR and PeeringDB, ARIN is going to be hosting an IRR webinar, which they call Getting to Know IRR Online at ARIN, which I would expect to be a pretty good view of how to do things with ARIN in particular, but also of manipulating IRR objects in general. This webinar is going to be coming up on Tuesday the 18th at 1 o'clock Eastern, scheduled for an hour. There's a registration link there, but you can find all this off of ARIN underneath their training webinars pull down. And this, again, will be focused on how to do things with ARIN, talk about how to create entries, why you'd want to do it in the first place, how ARIN does things. And again, it's perfectly valid now to do things through ARIN. 5 years ago, I said you'd probably would have wanted to have avoided the ARIN routing registry, but I think it is becoming, based on complaints from the community, is becoming fully functional now, and it's probably more important that they have a fully functional registry because of the needs of RPKI and having validated address objects. Okay, some useful references here. One of them that I just came across when related to something that was mentioned on an ARIN mailing list, a quick start guide to documenting your prefixes of IRR. This looks to be a very good document on how to work through this. And some of the comments said they really swear by this document in trying to get up and running with RPSL and IRR. I think the document focuses on AltDB because it's something that you don't need to make any special arrangements to use. Another resource is the Internet2 IRR working group. We're really not an active working group in some sense now, since our only charter was to produce a particular guidelines document, which has since been published and can be found in the archives of the mailing list. That document mentioned some useful tools for manipulating IRR data. There are various tools you can use to sort of, if you want to see what prefixes would be pulled out of, say, an AS set in IRR, you can run these tools against IRR and it will generate a list of prefixes. I think that's probably the sanest way to generate filters, although I think most of us probably aren't doing it that way yet. And there is a link for signing up on that mailing list. The mailing list is still active. It doesn't have that much traffic on it, but it is a very good place to ask questions about things related to IRR. In fact, there's also RPKI discussion there. Steve Wallace, Grover Browning, some others from Internet2, Jeff Bardig hang out on that list quite a bit and are there to answer questions too. So that concludes my talk. And so what questions do we have now?
All right, well, thanks so much. That was really great to get those two overviews. So just as a reminder, if anybody does have questions, please ask them in the chat window and I'll read them out so that Michael can answer them. So I just had a couple of quick ones that I wrote down here. Well, first of all, I'll poll the audience. So of the people who represent regional networks and campuses, maybe write in the chat room if you are adopting any of these approaches already, or if you're going to try to look into them into the future, because I think that good practice community-wide is certainly something we should be encouraging. Second question I had is that you pointed it out, these things get a little bit crufty. What's sort of the time that's needed for maintenance on something like this? It's probably, of course, a lot of front loading to get the information in, but then how often should somebody be going back and checking the data and spending time on a regular basis to make sure that it's accurate?
Well, I think for most regionals, it's going to be a case that if you lose a customer, you probably need to go through and remove any of their data from your maintainer object or any references to their ASNs from your AS sets or things of that nature. But for most of us, for smaller regionals at least, the amount of maintenance work is not that high because many of us do not really add members that often or don't lose members that often. And it's more a matter of remembering how to do things quite often than being too busy doing them to have anything else to do. I did notice particularly AS sets are probably the big place where you'll forget to make the changes. It's easy to remember to remove somebody's routes from the database. It's a lot harder to go back through some other object which references them indirectly.
Okay, so we had two comments, first of all. So Worcester is using PeeringDB and Aaron IRR. So thanks for letting us know, Jason. And NCSA lets ICCN and UIUC proxy maintain their IRR. So that's good to know as well. Ken is asking, do you know if most of the regionals that sort of make up the Internet2 constellation are doing this proxy registration for their customers? Do you have any insight into that?
From what I have heard, that for those regionals who use RADB, many if not most do the proxy registration because otherwise it would be necessary for the downstreams to create their own objects and pay the fee to merit for RADB. Those who are using Aaron, though, I know I cannot remember which regional it was, somewhere down in the south where the engineers with the state network sort of did the outreach necessary to their customers to bring them up to speed on how to get things into the Aaron routing registry so that they did not have to do the proxy registration.
All right, that's good to know. All right, we don't have any other questions right now, but I'll give a last call. If anybody has any other questions or comments, please type them in. I'll make sure that we get this video posted. And then Michael, if you can remember to send me the slides, I'll post those as well.
I will do that. I waited
and then just,
until after the talk so they'd be done.
Well, perfect. And then just as a foreshadowing, as you noted and Michael typed into the chat room, Michael Sinatra will give a little bit of an overview of MANRS and RPKI and how a lot of this sort of dovetails together. I want to say that's mid-September, but I don't have the date in front of me on that one. So there'll be an announcement about it pretty soon. All right, so no more questions. Hope everybody got something out of this. Certainly share this with people on your campus if they didn't have a chance to attend live. We want to make sure that best practices like this are facilitated even if we can't be at conferences together. So we'll make sure that this stuff gets posted. And next week, we're going to have a talk from Ken Miller talking about the data movement exhibition. So that'll be same time on the 14th. So hope everybody has a good weekend, and we'll talk to y'all soon.
Okay, thanks, Jason.